A millionaire rescues a helpless wolf pup. Over time, the animal grows and becomes imposing, but something unexpected happens when it reaches adulthood. Dawn was breaking lazily in the Blue Ridge Mountains, while Michael Anderson walked through the verdant fields of the environmental reserve. His face revealed the serenity of someone who finally found a moment of peace, away from the spotlight and endless meetings, that his position as president of one of America's largest environmental technology companies demanded. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. The first rays of sun were painting the horizon when he decided to venture onto a lesser-known trail, ignoring the cautious warnings of local guides. There was something in the stories his grandmother told about that place that always called to him, like a distant whisper that only his heart could hear. Since childhood, narratives about the local fauna, especially about the majestic grey wolves, populated his dreams. "Mr. Anderson, perhaps we should follow the established route," suggested Jack, the reserve's most experienced guide, with evident concern in his voice. "This area has shown signs of irregular activity in recent days." Michael made a gentle gesture with his hand, dismissing the concern. "Just a few more minutes, Jack. There's something special about this place." His eyes scanned the landscape with fascination, as if searching for something he couldn't even define. It was then that an almost imperceptible sound caught his attention. Among the bushes, a low, pained whimper cut through the morning silence. Michael stopped, his heart inexplicably racing. He approached cautiously, gently pushing aside the branches, and his world changed forever. There, curled up and trembling, was a grey wolf pup. Its amber eyes, though frightened, met Michael's with an intensity he would never forget. The small animal had visible injuries, and its labored breathing betrayed its weakened state. "Probably abandoned by its mother after a hunter's attack," Jack explained, approaching cautiously. "Unfortunately, this has become common in the region. Pups rarely survive alone." Something inside Michael transformed at that moment. His entire life of privilege and corporate responsibilities seemed small in the face of this defenseless being that fate had placed in his path. "We can't leave it here," he declared with a conviction that surprised even himself. "Mr. Anderson, there are protocols. The reserve has specific rules about interfering with wild animals," Jack argued, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. But Michael wasn't listening anymore. With a gentleness that contrasted with his usually formal demeanor, he approached the pup. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now," he murmured, removing his Italian cashmere coat to wrap the injured animal. "Mr. Anderson, I need to warn you about the legal implications," another guide began, but was interrupted by a determined look from Michael. "I take full responsibility," he declared, as he picked up the pup in his arms. "This little warrior deserves a chance, and I'm going to make sure he gets it." On that morning, under the Blue Ridge Mountains sky, a story was born that would defy all conventions. The pup, which would later be christened Nova, and Michael, the discreet billionaire, were beginning a journey that would transform not only their lives, but those of everyone around them. As they returned to the base camp, Michael was already making calls, mobilizing his team to arrange everything necessary for the animal's transport and care. His mind, usually occupied with spreadsheets and million-dollar contracts, now could only think about how to protect that small life that fate had placed in his hands. What no one could predict was that this seemingly casual encounter in the Blue Ridge Mountains would be just the beginning of an extraordinary story. A story that would question the limits between the wild and civilized worlds, between duty and love, between social conventions and bonds that transcend any rational explanation. The arrival at the Anderson mansion in New York was marked by astonished looks and whispers from the staff. Margaret, the housekeeper, who had served the family for more than 2 decades, couldn't disguise her concern when she saw Michael entering with the small grey wolf pup in his arms. "Mr. Michael, are you sure about this?" she asked, nervously adjusting her immaculately white apron. "A wild animal? In the mansion?" Michael crossed the immense entrance hall with determined steps, the pup still wrapped in his cashmere coat. "Margaret, please prepare the east wing of the garden. I want to transform it into a suitable space for him, and call Dr. Thompson, the veterinarian who cares for the animals at the municipal zoo." News of the arrival of the new resident spread quickly through the property. Within hours, the mansion was buzzing with a different energy. Gardeners were mobilized to adapt part of the grounds, creating an environment that resembled the natural habitat of the grey wolf. Michael personally supervised every detail, consulting experts via video calls and studying documents on the species' behavior. Dr. Thompson arrived at nightfall, carrying his veterinary equipment bag. After a thorough examination, he diagnosed that the pup was malnourished and had some abrasions, but nothing that would compromise its recovery. "He has a long journey ahead, Mr. Anderson. He'll need constant care and a lot of patience." During the first few nights, Michael abandoned his master suite to sleep in the office near the garden, where he could monitor the new guest. The pup, still frightened, took refuge in the darkest corners of the space prepared for him, refusing approach. "I'll call him Nova," Michael decided on a starry night as he watched the small animal through the window. The name came naturally, inspired by the wild gleam in the wolf's eyes and the connection Michael always felt with starry nights during his expeditions. The mansion's routine underwent a complete transformation. Corporate meetings now shared space with feeding schedules and veterinary care. Michael surprised everyone by cancelling an important business trip to London, preferring to stay in New York during Nova's first weeks of adaptation. "You're different," observed Emily, his assistant, during an afternoon of work in the mansion's office. "I've never seen you so involved with something beyond business." Michael smiled, his gaze constantly drifting to the garden where Nova was beginning to timidly explore his new territory. "You know, Emily, for the first time I feel like I'm doing something truly meaningful, something that goes beyond contracts and profits." However, not everything was rosy. The presence of a wild animal in one of New York's most prestigious mansions began to generate buzz. Some staff members expressed fear, especially after an incident where Nova, startled by thunder, knocked over an ancient Chinese porcelain during a stormy night. "Mr. Anderson," began Robert, the head of security, with visible concern, "some team members are apprehensive. We don't know how he'll react when he grows up." Michael remained steadfast. "Arrange specialized training for the entire team. Bring in animal behavior experts. We'll do whatever it takes to make everyone feel safe and for Nova to have the best possible environment." As the days passed, something extraordinary began to happen. The once skittish pup began to respond to Michael's constant and patient presence. First, there were curious glances, then small approaches during meals. On one particularly significant morning, Nova allowed Michael to pet him for the first time. That moment of connection, seemingly simple, marked the beginning of a profound transformation. Michael, the businessman known for his discretion and pragmatism, was discovering a new dimension of himself through the bond with this wild creature. What no one could predict was that this special relationship would be just the beginning of a journey that would challenge not only social conventions, but also the limits of love and loyalty. Months passed, and Nova grew surprisingly well under Michael's dedicated care. The fragile and frightened pup gave way to an imposing young grey wolf, with its characteristic long legs and silvery grey coat. The transformation wasn't just physical. The trust between animal and human strengthened each day, creating a bond that intrigued everyone who witnessed it. Michael completely adapted his routine. Mornings, once filled with executive meetings, now began with long walks through the mansion's gardens with Nova. The wolf developed the habit of accompanying the businessman to his office, lazily lying on a rug specially placed near the mahogany desk. "It's extraordinary," commented Dr. Thompson during a follow-up visit. "I've never seen a grey wolf develop such a close relationship with a human. He maintains his wild instincts, but has clearly chosen to trust you." However, Nova's presence began to generate increasingly complex situations. During a charity dinner held at the mansion, the wolf caused a stir by unexpectedly appearing in the main hall. Some guests reacted with fascination, others with evident discomfort. "Michael, darling," intervened Elizabeth, his mother, after the event, "I understand your attachment to this animal, but we need to maintain certain appearances. Society has expectations of our family." "Mother," Michael replied with a serenity that surprised everyone, "Nova isn't a whim. He represents something greater than our social conventions." The situation gained a new dimension when Sarah Blackwood, heiress to an important business group and old family friend, showed genuine interest in Nova during a visit to the mansion. Unlike other visitors, she showed no fear, approaching the wolf with respect and curiosity. "It's incredible how you've transformed your life for him," Sarah observed, while watching Michael interact with Nova in the garden. "Few would have that courage." Sarah's comment touched on something deep. Indeed, Michael had changed. The businessman once known for his coldness in business was now seen in a different light. His dedication to Nova revealed a human side that few knew, and this began to reflect even in his business decisions. Ecotech, under his leadership, began investing more aggressively in environmental conservation projects. Board meetings, once focused solely on numbers, now included discussions about environmental impact and preservation of American wildlife. However, not everyone viewed these changes favorably. Richard, his financial director, expressed concern during a tense meeting. "The shareholders are restless, Michael. They think you're allowing emotions to interfere with business." Michael's response was firm. "Perhaps it's time for our shareholders to understand that business success and environmental responsibility are not mutually exclusive." The turning point occurred during an apparently ordinary afternoon. Michael was conducting an important video call when he heard a commotion coming from the back of the mansion. Upon investigating, he discovered that Nova had prevented a new gardener, uninformed about security protocols, from entering a restricted area of the property. The incident, although without major consequences, generated a wave of rumors. Neighbors began to question the safety of having a wild animal in a residential area. Social media was buzzing with divergent opinions about the case. Emily, always loyal, tried to minimize the situation. "They're just people who don't understand, Mr. Anderson. They don't see what we see every day." But Michael knew something bigger was coming. Nova's attentive gaze, his constant and protective presence, seemed to foreshadow significant changes on the horizon. What began as an act of compassion had transformed into a story that challenged the boundaries between the wild and civilized worlds. That night, observing Nova under the starry sky that inspired his name, Michael reflected on how much their lives had intertwined. What no one could predict was that the true challenges of this unique partnership were just beginning to reveal themselves, and that the bond between them would be tested in ways no one could imagine. The grand hall of the Anderson mansion was decorated with rare orchids and century-old crystals for Ecotech's annual event. Businessmen, politicians, and environmentalists gathered to celebrate the company's advances in sustainable technology. Michael, impeccable in his Italian tuxedo, moved among the guests with the ease of someone born to lead. What no one expected was that Nova, who normally kept his distance during social events, would decide to make a memorable appearance. The grey wolf, now fully grown, crossed the hall with a wild elegance, stopping beside Michael during his speech about environmental preservation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael improvised, maintaining calm while some guests stirred, "allow me to introduce the true protagonist of our conservation mission. This is Nova, a survivor who teaches us daily about the importance of protecting our fauna." Cell phones began to record the unique moment. One video in particular, captured by Sofia Mendez, a digital influencer present at the event, showed Nova in a protective stance next to Michael, his attentive eyes scanning the hall while the businessman spoke. The scene was extraordinary. The imposing grey wolf and the billionaire side by side, as if that unlikely partnership was the most natural thing in the world. Within hours, the video went viral. Social media exploded with comments, theories, and heated debates. The billionaire and the wolf became a trending topic, dividing opinions and generating a media storm that Michael, always discreet, had never experienced. "This is a public relations nightmare," declared Clara Montero, Ecotech's communications director, during an emergency meeting. "The headlines are everywhere. We need a strategy to control this exposure." But the real challenge came with the polarized reactions. While thousands of people were enchanted by the story, sharing messages of support and admiration, conservationist groups began to question the legitimacy of the situation. "A wild animal is not a luxury pet," Dr. Fernando Ribeiro, a renowned biologist, thundered on a television program. "As well-intentioned as Mr. Anderson may be, we need to question the impact of this forced domestication." The pressure increased when neighbors of the mansion began giving interviews expressing their concerns. "What if this animal attacks someone?" questioned a resident of the upscale neighborhood. "Who will be held responsible?" Amid the turmoil, Sarah Blackwood emerged as an unexpected ally. Using her own influence on social media, She began sharing her positive experience with Nova, defending the unique relationship between the animal and Michael. "What I witnessed in that mansion is not a story of domestication," she wrote in a viral post. "It's a lesson about mutual respect between species, about how love can transcend barriers we considered insurmountable." Michael, however, realized he needed to make a decision. The sudden exposure was affecting Nova, who showed signs of restlessness with the increased movement in the mansion. Photographers began to lurk around the property, and journalists called incessantly requesting interviews. During a particularly hectic night, with flashes firing through the mansion gates, Nova took refuge in Michael's office, his behavior evidencing discomfort with all that unwanted attention. "We need to protect him," Michael declared to Emily, who watched him with concern. "We can't allow this exposure to affect his well-being." That's when an idea began to form in his mind. If he couldn't avoid the spotlight, perhaps he could direct it towards something greater. Nova's story could be a catalyst for significant changes in how society viewed the preservation of American wildlife. As he stroked the silvery fur of his unlikely companion, Michael began to elaborate a plan that would transform this moment of exposure into an opportunity to create a lasting legacy. What he didn't know was that this decision would trigger a series of events that would test not only his determination, but also the strength of the unique bond he shared with Nova. The decision to transform the media exposure into something positive wasn't made overnight. Michael spent sleepless nights in his office, accompanied only by Nova and a cup of coffee, elaborating a plan that could honor the extraordinary journey they both shared. "We're going to do this right," he murmured to Nova, who watched him with attentive eyes. "Your story can help save others like you." The first initiative was to organize a charity event unlike anything New York had ever seen. The Anderson Mansion would be transformed into an environmental awareness center for a day, with preservation experts, biologists, and environmentalists gathered to discuss the protection of American wildlife. However, not everyone received the idea with enthusiasm. Amanda Torres, an influential environmental activist, published a critical article on her blog. "Using a wild animal as a mascot is a setback in the fight for preservation. We cannot romanticize human interference in natural habitats." The criticism hit Michael deeper than he would like to admit. During a meeting with his team, Emily noticed his discomfort. "Mr. Anderson, maybe we should rethink the strategy." "No," Michael interrupted, his voice firm. "They don't understand that Nova isn't a mascot. He's a survivor, a symbol of resilience, and we're going to show that to the world." The charity event was scheduled for a sunny Saturday. The mansion was unrecognizable. Informational stands about different endangered American species, lectures on environmental preservation, and even a photographic exhibition portraying wildlife in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Sarah Blackwood, who had become a constant presence in Michael and Nova's life, helped organize a special space dedicated to gray wolves. "People need to understand the importance of this species to our ecosystem," she explained, while adjusting informational panels. The most touching moment of the event happened when Michael took the stage to tell Nova's story. The wolf, as if understanding the importance of the moment, remained by his side, serene and majestic. "Nova isn't just a rescue story," Michael began, his voice thick with emotion. "He represents all the animals that suffer from man's predatory action. Each day with him teaches me about responsibility, about unconditional love, about the urgent need to preserve our natural riches." The emotional speech went viral instantly. This time, the repercussion was different. Messages of support began to emerge from all corners of the country. Children sent drawings of Nova, schools requested lectures on environmental preservation, and even some critics began to change their opinion. However, the success of the event brought new challenges. Environmental organizations began pressuring for technical visits to the mansion, wanting to evaluate the conditions in which Nova lived. Some even suggested that the wolf should be transferred to a natural reserve. During one of these visits, Michael watched apprehensively as experts examined the space created for Nova. Dr. Thompson, who accompanied the inspection, noticed his concern. "You know, Michael," the veterinarian began, "in all my years of practice, I've never seen a wild animal so well adapted and at the same time so true to its nature. What you've built here is unique." Dr. Thompson's words brought some comfort, but Michael knew that the challenges were just beginning. The growing exposure meant more responsibility, more scrutiny, more pressure. That night, after the last visitor left, Michael found Nova in his favorite spot in the garden, observing the stars. He sat next to the wolf, feeling the weight of the decisions he would need to make. "We're in this together, friend," he whispered, as Nova gently rested his head on Michael's shoulder. The simple gesture carried a silent promise. Whatever path lay ahead, they would face it united. What Michael didn't know was that his determination would be put to the test sooner than he imagined. Fate was preparing new challenges that would test not only his dedication to Nova, but also his ability to remain true to his principles in the face of increasing pressures. The main auditorium of Ecotech was packed for the largest charity event ever held by the company. Michael had transformed the launch of the new environmental preservation project into an opportunity to show how companies could combine technological development with nature conservation. Nova, as always, remained by his side, his majestic presence causing admiration among the guests. "This is just the beginning," Michael announced at the microphone, while slides showed images of preserved areas. Ecotech commits to allocating 30% of its profits to the creation of natural sanctuaries throughout America. The announcement was met with an explosion of applause. Sarah Blackwood, seated in the front row, smiled proudly. She had become an important ally in recent months, helping to structure conservation projects. It was then that everything changed. A group of approximately 20 people invaded the auditorium, wearing T-shirts with the words, "Animal Freedom Now." They carried posters and shouted slogans against what they called exploitation of wildlife. "Free the wolf," shouted a red-haired woman, who would later be identified as the leader of the radical group Free Nature. "This isn't love, it's imprisonment." The event security was caught by surprise. Some guests panicked, others began filming the confusion with their cell phones. Amidst the chaos, Nova demonstrated behavior that surprised everyone. Instead of becoming agitated or showing aggression, the grey wolf remained serene beside Michael, as if he perfectly understood his role. His calm and vigilant posture contrasted with the agitation around him. "Look," shouted Sarah, standing up. "Look how he acts. Is this slavery to you? Would an enslaved animal act like this?" The invaders, however, were not interested in dialogue. Two of them tried to approach the stage, possibly with the intention of creating an even more dramatic scene. It was at this moment that Nova stepped forward, placing himself between the invaders and Michael. There was no aggression in his gesture, only instinctive protection. The scene was captured by dozens of cameras. The grey wolf, in all his wild magnificence, demonstrating a bond that transcended any argument about captivity or freedom. "Stop!" Michael's voice thundered through the auditorium. "If you really care about preserving wildlife, look around. See what we're building here. This isn't a show, it's a mission." Security finally managed to contain the invaders, who were escorted out of the building. But the incident left deep marks on Michael. That night, alone in his office with Nova, he allowed himself to question all his decisions. "Are they right?" he murmured, while stroking his companion's silvery fur. "Am I being selfish in keeping you with me?" In response, Nova rested his head on Michael's lap, a gesture that had long become his way of showing affection and trust. In that silent moment, the connection between them seemed stronger than ever. Emily entered the office with a cup of tea and surprising news. "Mr. Anderson, the video of the incident is going viral, but not in the way the invaders expected. People are amazed by Nova's behavior. Indeed, social media was exploding with comments about the animal's nobility, about how his attitude demonstrated a genuine bond that went beyond any theory about domestication. Experts began publishing analyses of Nova's unique behavior, highlighting how he maintained his wild instincts while demonstrating an extraordinary connection with Michael. The incident, which could have been a disaster, ended up transforming into a moment of reflection on the different forms of love and protection in the animal kingdom. But for Michael, it brought an even greater certainty. His responsibility to Nova went beyond simple physical care. It was a life mission that needed to be honored, regardless of the obstacles that might arise along the way. What he didn't know was that fate still held even greater challenges, which would test not only his determination, but also the extraordinary strength of the bond he shared with Nova. The first time Michael noticed something different about Nova was during one of their morning walks in the mansion's gardens. The grey wolf, normally agile and alert, seemed slower, less interested in his surroundings. At first, Michael tried to convince himself it was just fatigue, perhaps a result of the agitation from recent events. "Something's not right," he commented to Dr. Thompson during a routine visit. The veterinarian, who had been monitoring Nova since his rescue, performed a thorough examination of the animal. "I'll collect some samples for analysis," said the doctor, his expression more serious than usual. "I noticed some changes that need to be investigated in more detail." The following days were filled with agonizing waiting. Nova began to refuse food, his increasingly lethargic behavior worrying everyone in the mansion. Emily reorganized Michael's entire schedule, canceling commitments that weren't absolutely essential. "You need to rest too," she insisted, observing the deep circles forming under her boss's eyes. "You won't help Nova if you fall ill as well." When the diagnosis finally arrived, it was worse than everyone had feared. Nova had contracted a rare infection, possibly a result of his compromised immune system from past traumas. "We need to act quickly," Dr. Thompson explained. "This type of infection can be very aggressive in wild animals. I'll need to consult specialists, maybe even international ones." News of Nova's illness leaked to the press, generating a new wave of speculation and criticism. Groups that had already questioned the wolf's presence in the mansion intensified their attacks. "This is the natural result of keeping a wild animal in captivity," declared an activist on a television program. "His place is in nature, not in a mansion in New York." Sarah Blackwood, who had become a constant presence in Michael and Nova's life, was one of the first to offer support. "We'll mobilize all necessary resources," she assured. "I know specialists in Europe who can help us." The treatment was intensive and required total dedication. Michael transformed one of the mansion's wings into a small clinic with medical equipment and a team of veterinarians on 24-hour duty. The nights were long, with Michael sleeping on a couch near where Nova rested. "You're going to be okay, friend," he whispered during the early hours, gently stroking the wolf's fur. "We've overcome so many things together." Nova's illness revealed a side of Michael that few knew. The always discreet and controlled businessman now openly showed his vulnerability. On a particularly difficult afternoon, when Nova took a turn for the worse, Emily found him crying silently in his office. "You know," she began gently, "in all these years working for you, I've never seen you fight so hard for something. This isn't just about saving an animal, it's about true love." Emily's words touched Michael deeply. It was true. Nova had become much more than a pet or a preservation project. He was family, he was purpose, he was a fundamental part of his life. The battle for Nova's recovery mobilized people from different parts of the world. Specialist veterinarians offered online consultations, researchers shared studies on similar cases, and even some former critics showed solidarity. Amidst the distress, Michael realized that Nova's illness, paradoxically, was uniting people around a greater cause. The story of the grey wolf that won the heart of a billionaire was sensitizing people to the importance of preserving American wildlife. What no one could predict was that this trial would be just the beginning of an even more challenging journey, which would test not only Nova's physical resilience, but also the strength of the unique bond he shared with Michael. Nova's recovery was slow but steady, surprising even the most experienced veterinarians. After weeks of intensive treatment, the grey wolf began to show signs of his old vitality. Michael, following medical recommendations, decided to organize small outings with Nova in a private park near the mansion to aid in his rehabilitation. On a particularly pleasant Sunday afternoon, while they were walking in the park, something unusual happened. Julia, a 6-year-old girl playing near a set of bushes, didn't notice the silent approach of a snake camouflaged among the foliage. Nova, who was walking calmly beside Michael, suddenly became alert. His ears perked up, and his tense body indicated that something was wrong. Before any adult could understand what was happening, the grey wolf darted towards the girl. "Nova, no!" shouted Michael, fearing that his companion's sudden behavior might frighten the child. But what happened next left all present astounded. With impressive precision, Nova positioned himself between Julia and the snake, emitting a low growl that made the serpent retreat. The girl's mother, who was talking with other people a few meters away, ran over upon hearing the alert, only to witness the extraordinary scene. "My God!" she exclaimed, taking Julia in her arms while observing Nova maintain his protective position until the snake completely disappeared into the vegetation. The incident immediately attracted the attention of park goers. Cell phones recorded the moment when Nova, after averting the danger, calmly returned to Michael's side as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "He saved my daughter," declared Julia's mother, between tears of gratitude, "like a four-legged guardian angel." News of Nova's heroism spread quickly. Within hours, social media was flooded with videos of the incident. Journalists began to congregate at the gates of the Anderson mansion, all wanting more details about the grey wolf that had become a hero. Sarah Blackwood, who was accompanying Michael and Nova on the walk, couldn't contain her emotion as she reported the event to reporters. It was something extraordinary to witness. Nova not only demonstrated his natural instincts, but also impressive discernment. He protected that child as if she were part of his family. Dr. Thompson, analyzing the videos of the incident, was amazed. "This behavior is fascinating from a scientific point of view. Nova maintained his hunting and territorial protection instincts, typical of the species, but directed them to protect a human child. It's truly unique." Julia's family insisted on personally meeting Michael and Nova to thank them. During the encounter, organized in the mansion's garden, the little girl demonstrated an instant connection with the wolf. "He's my hero," she declared, while Nova allowed with surprising gentleness for her to caress his silvery fur. The episode brought a new perspective to the debate about Nova's presence in the city. Those who previously questioned the safety of having a wild animal in an urban area now saw a different side of the story. "This incident proves something I've always known," Michael commented during an interview. "Nova hasn't lost his wild essence, but has chosen to use his instincts to protect and care. He teaches us daily about the complexity and beauty of nature." At night, alone with Nova in his office, Michael reflected on how his companion continued to surprise him. The grey wolf rested peacefully at his feet, as if he hadn't become the hero of the day. "You never cease to amaze me, friend," Michael murmured, observing the stars through the window. What he didn't know was that fate still held more surprises, and that the extraordinary journey they shared was far from over. New York was under a devastating storm that night. Lightning cut through the dark sky, and the wind howled between the city buildings. In the Anderson mansion, Michael was working in his office, taking advantage of the nocturnal silence to finalize the last details of a new environmental preservation project. Nova, who would normally be restless with the thunderstorms, remained strangely alert. His ears moved constantly, capturing sounds that human ears couldn't perceive. From time to time he approached the window, observing the darkness with unusual intensity. "What is it, friend?" Michael asked, noticing his companion's different behavior. It was rare to see Nova so vigilant, especially during a storm. The answer came in the form of a low, controlled growl. Nova positioned himself in front of the office door, his body tense like a violin string about to snap. Seconds later, a metallic noise, almost imperceptible under the roar of thunder, echoed from the east side of the property. "Mr. Anderson!" The urgent voice of John, the head of night security, sounded through the intercom. "The cameras in the east sector are offline." Before Michael could respond, Nova darted towards the corridor, his behavior making it clear that something was wrong. Years of coexistence had taught Michael to trust his companion's instincts. "John, activate the emergency protocol," Michael ordered through the communicator following Nova. "And call for reinforcements immediately." The grey wolf moved silently through the mansion's corridors, guiding Michael as if he knew exactly the origin of the threat. As they approached the library, they heard the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. Nova emitted a louder growl this time, his posture making clear his intention to protect. The sound was enough to alert the intruders, who didn't expect to encounter a grey wolf during their incursion. "What the hell is that?" shouted one of the men, dropping a bag of equipment. The panic in his voice was evident as he faced Nova, who now blocked their escape route. The library's security cameras, still functioning, captured the entire scene. Nova, majestic and imposing, keeping the intruders cornered until the arrival of security guards, without ever launching a direct attack. His intimidating presence was enough to prevent any attempt at reaction. "It's incredible," commented the detective who responded to the incident. "In all my years of service, I've never seen anything like it. This wolf acted with more precision than many trained police dogs. The news spread quickly. The security camera footage showing Nova in action went viral, generating a new wave of admiration for the grey wolf. Animal behavior experts were called in to analyze the recordings. "The most impressive thing," explained Dr. Sofia Mendez, a specialist in wild canine behavior, is how he showed restraint. A purely wild animal would have attacked by instinct. Nova showed an extraordinary level of discernment. Sarah Blackwood, visiting the mansion the next day, couldn't contain her admiration. "He surprises us more every day," she commented, observing Nova, who now rested peacefully in the garden as if the previous night's agitation hadn't happened. For Michael, the incident was further proof of the special bond he shared with Nova. "He's not just a pet or an attraction," he declared in an interview. "He's an extraordinary being who chose to protect us, who developed a unique understanding of the world around him." The story of the grey wolf who protected the mansion during the storm became another chapter in Nova's already extraordinary saga. But for those who truly knew his story, it was just another demonstration of what they already knew, that the bond between Michael and Nova transcended any simple classification of the relationship between man and animal. What no one could predict was that this incident would be just the prelude to even bigger changes in both their lives. Fate still held surprises that would test not only their courage, but also the depth of their unique connection. The trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains wasn't just another business meeting for Michael. It was a return to the origins, to the place where it all began. Ecotech had organized a meeting with local environmentalists to discuss new preservation projects, and this time Nova was accompanying them. "Everything is prepared for his arrival," assured Jack, the same guide who was present on the day of Nova's rescue. "We've adapted the entire structure of the visitors' center to receive you both." From the moment they arrived at the reserve, Michael noticed a change in Nova's behavior. The grey wolf seemed more agitated, his nostrils moving constantly, capturing the various aromas of the region. His eyes scanned the landscape with a different intensity, as if recognizing something familiar in the air. "It's fascinating to observe him here," commented Sarah, who had insisted on accompanying them. "It's as if he's rediscovering a part of himself." During a walk through the reserve, something extraordinary happened. A pack of grey wolves was spotted in the distance, a rare sight even for the most experienced researchers. Nova immediately became alert, his ears moving in the direction of the other animals. "I've never seen him like this," Michael whispered to Dr. Thompson, who was also present to monitor Nova's reaction to the natural environment. The veteran veterinarian watched attentively. "It's the call of the wild, Michael. As much as Nova has developed a unique connection with you, he still carries in his DNA thousands of years of evolution and wild instinct." The most touching moment came when one of the grey wolves emitted a sound characteristic of the species. Nova responded immediately, his howl echoing through the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was a sound that Michael had never heard before, loaded with a primitive emotion that touched everyone present. "Amazing!" exclaimed one of the researchers, quickly making notes. "He maintained all the natural behaviors of the species, even after years of human coexistence." Michael observed the scene with a mixture of admiration and a sudden understanding that tightened his heart. For the first time, he saw Nova not just as his companion, but as part of something greater, of a species struggling to survive in an increasingly hostile world. "It's as if he has two natures," reflected Sarah, noticing Michael's pensive expression. "The one he developed with you, and the one that always existed in him." At night, while everyone rested at the research center, Nova remained restless, his eyes fixed in the direction where the other wolves had been seen. Michael sat beside him, as he had done so many times before in his mansion in New York. "You miss this, don't you?" he murmured, stroking his friend's silvery fur. "This freedom, this space, your own kind." It was at that moment, under the starry sky of the Blue Ridge Mountains, that an idea began to form in Michael's mind, an idea that would change not only his life and Nova's, but could transform the future of environmental preservation in America. Dr. Thompson, who observed the scene from afar, approached silently. "You know, Michael, sometimes the greatest act of love is understanding that those we love need more than we can offer alone." The veterinarian's words echoed deeply in Michael. There, in that moment of clarity under the stars, he began to visualize a new chapter in his journey with Nova. Not an end, but a transformation, an evolution of the special bond they shared. What no one knew was that this trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains would be the catalyst for a decision that would not only honor Nova's unique nature, but also create a lasting legacy for the preservation of American wildlife. The return to New York after the trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains was quiet. Michael spent long moments observing Nova, who seemed different since the encounter with the other gray wolves. It wasn't sadness or restlessness he saw in his companion, but a new awareness of his own nature. "Emily," Michael called on his first day back at the office, "cancel all my commitments for the next 2 weeks. We have a new priority project." His assistant noticed something different in her boss's tone of voice. It was the same determination she had seen years ago when he decided to rescue Nova. "Something related to the Blue Ridge Mountains trip, sir." "Related to everything, Emily. To Nova, to the mountains, to the future we want to build." For days, Michael secluded himself in his office with a select team: architects, biologists, veterinarians, and environmental preservation specialists. Plants and projects covered the tables, while Nova observed everything with interest, as if understanding that something important was being born there. Sarah Blackwood, who had become an essential part of that story, was the first to see the complete project. "Michael, this is extraordinary," she exclaimed, her eyes shining as she examined the plans. The project was ambitious, a sanctuary for rescued animals that would combine environmental preservation with scientific research. It wouldn't be just a recovery site, but a center for studies and awareness, inspired by Nova's unique journey. "I want to create a space where other animals can have the chance Nova had," Michael explained during the first meeting with investors. "A place that respects their wild natures, but also allows for a meaningful connection with humans." The chosen location was an extensive property near the Blue Ridge Mountains, combining preserved forest areas with modern facilities for treatment and research. The project included educational trails, a rehabilitation center for injured animals, and an environmental education program for schools. But most importantly, Michael explained to Dr. Thompson, it will be a place where Nova can be who he is completely, both the wild wolf and the companion he chose to be. News of the project leaked to the press, generating a wave of national interest. "Billionaire transforms love for Grey Wolf into environmental legacy," the headlines announced. This time, even the fiercest critics found it difficult to question the initiative. "It's not about keeping wild animals in captivity," Michael declared at a press conference. "It's about creating bridges between our world and theirs, about learning to respect and protect our natural riches." Sarah, who had become much more than an ally in the project, found Michael observing Nova in the mansion's garden. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "You're transforming your story with him into something greater." The sanctuary began to take shape quickly. Ecotech allocated a significant portion of its resources to the project, and other entrepreneurs, inspired by the initiative, also offered support. Nova's story had touched more hearts than anyone could have imagined. On a quiet afternoon, while supervising the sanctuary's construction, Michael watched Nova exploring the terrain with evident satisfaction. The Grey Wolf seemed to understand that this space represented something special, a bridge between the two worlds he inhabited. "Look at that, friend," Michael murmured. "Who would have thought that encounter in the mountains would bring us here?" What had begun as an act of compassion had transformed into a much larger mission. The bond between Michael and Nova would not only survive this new phase, but would strengthen, serving as inspiration for a new generation of nature defenders. The Nova Sanctuary, as it was affectionately dubbed by the press, opened its doors on a sunny spring morning. The place was an impressive fusion of preserved nature and sustainable technology, perfectly reflecting Michael's vision for the future of environmental conservation in America. "It's more beautiful than we imagined," Emily commented emotionally, observing the main structure of the visitors' center, built with ecological materials and solar energy. "And to think it all started with an unexpected encounter in the mountains." Nova seemed especially at ease in the new environment. His private area in the sanctuary was a spacious area that connected with the native forest, allowing him to move freely between the wild and civilized worlds, exactly as his unique nature demanded. The sanctuary's first residents began to arrive: a mountain lion recovered from poachers, a black bear injured by wildfires, and 2 bald eagle chicks rescued from animal trafficking. Each new resident brought with them a story of overcoming that reminded of Nova's own journey. "It's fascinating to observe how he interacts with the other animals," commented Dr. Thompson, who had become the sanctuary's veterinary director. "It's as if Nova understands his role as an ambassador between the 2 worlds." Sarah, now coordinator of the sanctuary's educational program, organized visits from public schools, allowing children to learn firsthand about the preservation work. "When they hear Nova's story, their eyes light up," she recounted. "That's how we form the next generation of nature defenders." Michael divided his time between managing ecotech and the sanctuary, but it was visible where his heart was. Every morning, before any commitment, he made a point of walking with Nova through the property, a ritual that kept alive the special bond between them. "You know," he commented to Sarah during one of these walks, "at first I thought I was saving Nova. Now I understand that it was he who saved me, who showed me a greater purpose." The sanctuary quickly became an international reference in recovery and preservation of wild animals. Researchers from various countries visited the site, studying not only the rehabilitation methods, but also Nova's singular behavior. "It's a unique conservation model," declared a renowned biologist during a symposium held at the site. "The way they managed to create an environment that respects both the wild nature of the animals and their capacity for interaction with humans is revolutionary." On an especially significant afternoon, Michael watched from the research center's veranda as Nova joined a group of grey wolves that inhabited the region. The wolf played with his peers, but always returned to Michael, as if to say it was possible to belong to both worlds. "He chose the best of both paths," observed Dr. Thompson, joining Michael on the veranda. "He maintained his wild essence and yet created deep bonds with us. We couldn't ask for a better example." The success of the sanctuary inspired similar initiatives across the country. Entrepreneurs and environmentalists began to seek out Michael, interested in replicating the model in other regions. The love story between a man and a grey wolf was, little by little, transforming the way America viewed the preservation of its wildlife. "This is just the beginning," Michael said during an interview. "Each animal we recover, each child who learns about the importance of preservation, each person who is moved by these stories of overcoming, all of this is part of a larger movement." What had begun as a chance encounter in the Blue Ridge Mountains had transformed into a silent revolution in American environmental conservation. And at the center of it all remained Michael and Nova, proving that true love knows no barriers between species. The impact of the Nova Sanctuary on American society went far beyond initial expectations. In less than a year, the site had become a pilgrimage center for environmentalists, researchers, and nature lovers from around the world. The story of the grey wolf that changed the life of a businessman and inspired an environmental preservation movement continued to touch hearts and transform mindsets. "It's impressive how a love story can change so many lives," reflected Sarah during one of the lectures she gave to visitors. The study center's auditorium was packed, as it always was when Nova's story was the central theme. School visits became so frequent that it was necessary to create a special environmental education program. Children from all social classes had the opportunity to meet not only Nova, but all the rescued animals that found a home in the sanctuary. "Uncle Michael," asked a young visitor during one of the educational tours, "is it true that Nova chose to stay with you even though he could live in nature?" The innocent question touched Michael deeply. "Actually, little one, Nova chooses every day. He has the freedom to live as a wild wolf, but he also chooses to maintain his connection with us. That's what makes him so special." The sanctuary's animal rehabilitation program began to show surprising results. Several of the residents, after recovery, could be reintroduced to their natural habitat. Each success story was celebrated as a victory, not just for the sanctuary, but for the entire cause of preservation. "The method developed here is revolutionary," Dr. Thompson explained to a team of international documentarians. "We've managed to balance technical care with respect for each animal's wild nature, and we learned much of this by observing the relationship between Michael and Nova." Ecotech, under Michael's leadership, expanded its operations in the environmental area. The company developed specific technologies for monitoring and protecting conservation areas, many of them first tested in the sanctuary itself. "What began as a personal story has transformed into a movement," Emily commented, observing the map on the wall of Michael's office, which showed the various preservation projects inspired by the Nova Sanctuary across America. Even former critics surrendered to the success of the initiative. Amanda Torres, the activist who had previously questioned Michael's decision to keep Nova, was now a frequent collaborator at the sanctuary. "Sometimes we need to admit we were wrong," she declared during a symposium. "What they've built here goes far beyond what we could have imagined." The most significant impact, however, was seen in the small daily transformations. Families who visited the sanctuary left with a new perspective on environmental preservation. Businessmen who learned about the project rethought their corporate practices. Young people found inspiration to pursue careers related to nature conservation. On a particularly busy afternoon, Michael observed the movement of visitors from his office. Nova, lying at his feet as he always did, seemed satisfied with all the commotion his story had generated. "You see, friend," Michael murmured, stroking the wolf's head, "you didn't just change my life. You're changing the world, one heart at a time." What had begun as a chance encounter in the Blue Ridge Mountains had transformed into a movement that transcended borders and prejudices. The story of Michael and Nova proved that when love and purpose meet, there are no limits to the transformations that can happen. The sun was setting on the horizon of the sanctuary, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, when Sarah found Michael in his favorite spot, the lookout that offered a privileged view of the entire property. Nova, as always, was by his side, his presence a constant that had become an indispensable part of that scenario. "I knew I'd find you here," she said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Emily mentioned you skipped lunch again." Michael smiled, accepting the coffee. It was surprising how Sarah had become so attuned to his habits and concerns. What had begun as a professional partnership had subtly transformed into something deeper. "I was watching the new grey wolf pups that arrived," he explained. "It's impressive how Nova acts as a mentor to them. Who would have thought that the frightened pup I found years ago would become a reference for others of his species?" Sarah sat next to him on the rustic wooden bench. Nova immediately approached, resting his head on her lap, a gesture of affection he reserved for very few people. "He's always known how to recognize special people," Michael commented, observing the interaction. "From the first day when you visited the mansion, Nova showed that he trusted you." "And I always knew that you two were a complete package," she replied, with a soft smile. "It wasn't possible to get close to one without accepting the other." Working together at the sanctuary had brought Michael and Sarah closer in a way neither of them expected. They shared not only a passion for environmental preservation, but also a deep understanding of the importance of bonds that transcended traditional conventions. "You know," Sarah began after a moment of contemplative silence, "when I agreed to coordinate the sanctuary's educational program, I never imagined I'd find much more than professional fulfillment here." Michael looked at her curiously. "And what else did you find?" "A family," she answered simply. "You, Nova, all the animals, the people who work here, it's as if everything fit together perfectly." The moment was interrupted by a group of grey wolves approaching for the nightly ritual of socializing with Nova. It was a scene that still amazed everyone at the sanctuary, seeing how he naturally transitioned between the world of humans and that of his peers. He never needed to choose between one world and another, Michael reflected. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson Nova has taught us, that it's possible to belong to different worlds without losing your essence. Sarah intertwined her fingers with Michael's, a gesture that seemed as natural as the sunset before them. "Some people would say it's crazy to build a life around a wild animal. Some people will never understand that true love doesn't follow conventional rules," he completed, gently squeezing her hand. Nova returned to them, lying at their feet as if silently approving this moment of connection. The grey wolf who had transformed Michael's life now seemed to bless a new transformation. Night was falling over the sanctuary, bringing with it the natural symphony of forest sounds. It was a constant reminder that this space, created out of love for an animal, had become a catalyst for multiple forms of love, for the environment, for animals, and now, between two people who shared much more than a common project. "I think we need to thank him," Sarah said, smiling at Nova, "for being our unlikely Cupid." Michael laughed, a sound that echoed through the night, accompanied by Nova's soft howl, as if the wolf was also celebrating this moment of shared happiness. The Nova Sanctuary had transformed into a true paradise of environmental conservation. As the sun rose over the expanded facilities, Michael contemplated, from the veranda of his new house built within the property, how his dream had grown far beyond initial expectations. "The numbers from the latest report are impressive," commented Emily, who continued to be his faithful assistant, now dividing her time between Ecotech and the sanctuary. Over 100 animals rehabilitated and returned to nature in the last year, 3 new research centers inaugurated in different states, and the educational program reaching more than 10,000 children. Sarah, who now lived with Michael at the sanctuary, coordinated a national network of environmental education inspired by the model they had created. Her dedication to the project had been fundamental to its growth and international recognition. "The most gratifying thing," she said during a video call with international partners, "is seeing how Nova's story continues to inspire people around the world. We've received requests from 5 different countries wanting to replicate our conservation model." Nova, now a mature grey wolf, had become a legendary figure in the world of environmental conservation. His majestic presence and unique behavior continued to intrigue scientists and enchant visitors. He maintained his routine of alternating between moments with his human family and periods with the other grey wolves in the region. "It's as if he's created his own diplomacy between species," observed Dr. Thompson, who continued overseeing the health of all animals at the sanctuary. "Nova has established a perfect balance between his two worlds." The couple had transformed the sanctuary into a center of excellence in environmental preservation. Internationally renowned researchers regularly visited the site to study not only the rehabilitation methods, but also the unique management model that combined technology, preservation, and environmental education. On an especially significant afternoon, as they walked along the sanctuary's new sensory trail, Michael and Sarah observed a group of children in ecstasy at the sight of a flock of bald eagles soaring overhead. Nova walked calmly beside them, as he always did. "Sometimes I wonder if that frightened pup I found in the Blue Ridge Mountains knew he would change so many lives," Michael reflected, holding Sarah's hand. "He changed more than lives," she replied, smiling. "He changed the way people view environmental preservation. He showed that it's possible to build bridges between worlds that seemed incompatible." The sanctuary's work had expanded to include protection programs for various endangered species. Ecotech, under Michael's leadership, constantly developed new technologies to assist in the preservation and monitoring of American wildlife. "You know what impresses me the most?" Emily commented during a team meeting. "How all of this started with an act of compassion. An encounter that could have been just another rescue, transformed into a national preservation movement." At night, when the sanctuary quieted down, Michael, Sarah, and Nova maintained their ritual of stargazing from the lookout. It was a moment of connection that perfectly symbolized the harmony they had achieved. "We've built something extraordinary here," Sarah said, while Nova rested near them. "Something that goes far beyond ourselves." Michael nodded, observing how his furry companion occasionally raised his head to check the night sounds of the forest. It was a constant reminder of how Nova had never lost his wild essence, even while choosing to share his life with them. The sanctuary had become a symbol of hope, proving that it was possible to reconcile development and preservation, love and freedom, nature and progress. It was a legacy that would continue to inspire future generations to fight for the preservation of the natural world. The main auditorium of the Nova Sanctuary was packed for the inauguration ceremony of the International Center for Environmental Preservation Research. Representatives from various countries, renowned scientists and authorities gathered to celebrate another achievement of the project that began with the unlikely encounter between a businessman and a grey wolf. "Today we're not just celebrating the inauguration of a building," Michael began his speech, with Nova sitting serenely by his side on the stage. "We're celebrating the consolidation of a dream that proves that love for nature can transform realities." Sarah, who now shared with Michael not only her personal life but also the management of the sanctuary, watched with pride how the project had grown. The new research center would be responsible for developing innovative technologies for environmental preservation, uniting international scientific knowledge with the practical experience developed at the sanctuary. The Nova model of conservation, as it became known internationally, is already being implemented in 12 countries, she explained during the presentation of results. More than 1,000 animals have been rehabilitated following our methodology, and the success rate in reintegration to nature exceeds 80%. The sanctuary had transformed into a true environmental preservation complex. In addition to the Animal Rehabilitation Center and the educational program, it now had research laboratories, a training center for environmental professionals, and an international cooperation network for wildlife protection. "It's impressive how it all started with a love story," commented Emily, who remained Michael's right hand after so many years, a story that inspired thousands of others. During the ceremony, a special moment moved everyone. A group of children representing the schools participating in the educational program presented a documentary they had produced about Nova's story and the sanctuary's impact on their lives. "Uncle Michael and Nova taught us that we can change the world when we act with love," narrated one of the small voices in the video. "They showed that it doesn't matter who we are or where we come from, we can all make a difference." Nova, even showing signs of age in his slightly graying fur, maintained his majestic presence and his unique role as an ambassador between the wild and human worlds. His story continued to enchant and inspire all who came to the sanctuary. "You know what impresses me the most?" Dr. Thompson commented during the reception that followed the ceremony. "How Nova maintained his perfect balance between the two worlds throughout all these years. He never had to choose between being wild or domesticated. He created his own path." The sun was setting on the horizon when the last guests were leaving the event. Michael, Sarah, and Nova took their traditional walk through the sanctuary, observing how the space had transformed over the years. "Sometimes I wonder if that young businessman who found an injured pup in the Blue Ridge Mountains had any idea of what was to come," Michael reflected as they walked. "Some love stories are bigger than ourselves," Sarah replied, observing how Nova occasionally stopped to smell the air, always attentive to his two worlds. "They have the power to inspire generations. The legacy they had built would continue far beyond them. The seeds planted through the love of a man for a grey wolf had blossomed into a global movement of preservation and environmental awareness. It was a story that proved that love, in its most diverse forms, had the power to transform not just individual lives, but the entire world." And as Nova howled softly at the rising moon, as he did every night, his song seemed to carry a message of hope for the future. The sunrise in the Blue Ridge Mountains painted the sky with golden hues, very similar to Nova's coat. Michael and Sarah observed, from the same lookout where their love story began, a unique spectacle, a group of young grey wolves playing in the open field under Nova's watchful eye. "It's as if the circle is complete," Sarah commented, as she watched Nova interacting with the pups, some of them descendants of the wolves he himself had helped protect over the years. The Nova Sanctuary had become the largest grey wolf preservation center in the world. The success of the species breeding and reintegration program was studied and replicated internationally. But more than numbers and statistics, it was the story behind it all that continued to touch hearts. "Mr. Anderson," called John, one of the educational program coordinators, approaching with a group of special visitors. "The children from the first class of the Nature Guardians project came to surprise you. It was a different group. They were no longer children, but young adults. 10 years ago, they had been the first students in the sanctuary's educational program. Today, many of them were biologists, veterinarians, and environmental educators, following in the footsteps that Nova and Michael had inspired. You changed our lives," said one of the young women, now a veterinary student. "Your story taught us that love can transcend all barriers." Nova, sensing the commotion, approached the group with his characteristic mixture of wild elegance and affability. Even with his advanced age, he maintained his majestic presence and his unique role as a bridge between two worlds. "You know what makes me most proud?" Michael reflected, observing the scene. "It's not the awards, nor the international recognition. It's seeing how a love story can inspire so many other stories of transformation." The sanctuary had become much more than an environmental preservation center. It was a living symbol of how love, in its purest and most unconditional form, could change the world. The story of Michael and Nova had inspired a new generation of nature defenders, proving that the most beautiful transformations begin with a simple act of compassion. Emily, who was organizing an exhibition about the sanctuary's history, found an old photo of the day Michael rescued Nova. Who would have thought that that small injured pup would become such a powerful symbol of preservation? In the afternoon, as the sun set, Michael, Sarah, and Nova took their traditional walk through the sanctuary. It was a ritual that perfectly symbolized the harmony they had achieved between man and nature, between love and freedom, between preservation and progress. "Our story is just beginning," Sarah said, watching a new group of visitors marvel at the sanctuary's work. "Each person who passes through here takes with them a seed of transformation." Nova, as if understanding the depth of the moment, raised his head and emitted a soft howl, which was answered by other grey wolves in the region. It was a song that celebrated not only his unique journey, but all the lives that had been touched by it. And so, under the starry sky of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the story of Nova and Michael continued to inspire new stories of love, courage, and transformation. A story that began with an unlikely encounter and transformed into a global movement of preservation and hope. Dear listeners, the journey of Michael and Nova shows us that true love has the power to transform not only individual lives, but the entire world. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Together, we can continue spreading this message of love and preservation. After all, every small act of compassion can be the beginning of a great transformation. We look forward to seeing you in our next story.